I apologise now for the amount of times I'll get Iron Hands and Iron Warriors mixed up. Okay, to begin this process, we are attacking a rather large Baneblade chassis. This is a Fellblade painted in Iron Warriors scheme. Now, when painting Iron Warriors, painting all that silver, it's very easy to lose the lines of the sculpt with the reflection from the metallic. This video tutorial series will aim to demystify and show you a few tips along the way. But to begin with, let's have a look at the yellow and black chevrons. And of course, when painting yellow, we start with pink. So we use red, brown, life color primer, roughly 2:1 paint to thinner. And another video is out there currently that is picking up quite a bit of notoriety, I guess you could call it, using pink to paint yellow. I swear to God, this was painted about a year ago. Yes, I plan projects out in that time frame. So this was painted well before that video tutorial. Okay, so why are we using pink? Well, yellow is a notorious colour to have any kind of grip on a miniature. You airbrush yellow, it doesn't quite work, it doesn't quite adhere, it doesn't quite bind onto the surface that well. So by using skin tones, skin colours, skin-ish colours, we can build a structure that when we do apply the yellow, it binds on instantly. So these first few stages are building the structure. Next up, I will be using charred brown. This is Vallejo Air Color, 1:1 paint to thinner. And this is airbrushed into the shadows. Any shadow that you see, give a light glaze to. I've chosen to use a zenithal highlighting principle for this vehicle because I want it to be... I don't want a fantastical looking vehicle. I want something that's slightly more realistic in nature. Okay, next up, I'll be using Panzer Yellow, again from the Life Color Primer set. And this is 2:1 paint to thinner, so it's slightly thicker. These paints have been formulated to go into the airbrush, so you don't need as much thinner applied. Now when this is airbrushed onto the vehicle, it will leave a very clear, indelible mark behind. So already you can see we run the gamut between a dark brown to a mid-tone of pink. Very deep, kind of like... If you've ever seen a burnt pig, I should rephrase that, a sunburnt pig, that's the kind of red that they go. Don't ask where I know that from. Okay, so Panzer Yellow goes on top. And we've built the structure. We've built the house upon which... We've built the foundation, rather, upon which the house can sit. I butchered that. Okay, Yellow Ochre by Vallejo Air is added to an airbrush alongside Sol Yellow. And we are looking at a ratio of roughly 1:2 in favour of the thinner, paint to thinner. So this is a much thinner glaze consistency of paint, running the airbrush at 20 psi. And you'll notice from the movements of the airbrush, they are quick flowing motions across the entirety of the yellow section. I'm not worried one bit whatsoever at this point of overlapping it on any other aspect, because this needs to be masked off anyway. And you can see that one coat coverage and boom, we have yellow. How often have you struggled to build up yellow upon yellow upon yellow before you can even start modulating it? We've flipped on its head in that we've worked on the shadows and midtones first and then used the yellow as a filter right at the very end. But it ensures that it gives us thin multiple layers, a good depth to the yellow chevrons, and it also means that the yellow in one coat, we give ourselves a very good pleasing warm style yellow. Okay, Off-White is used, Off-White by Vallejo, undiluted, is used with a sponge. So this is a piece of sponge that comes with the character sets from Forge World. Alternatively, you can use sponge from your display case or carry case. Don't use a sponge that you use to clean dishes with. The structure of the foam isn't quite porous enough. This stuff is. undiluted paint is added. I have a pair of tweezers to make it the movement slightly more precise. I'll add this along the very hard edges of the yellow. Anywhere you would think to apply an edge highlight, anywhere that natural scuffs would appear. This is a dual effect in that we start the weathering stage right now, and it also defines the lines of the miniature. It's very important that we give some sort of definition throughout the painting process to the piece. Again, any hard-edged area that you see is fair game. I've spilt a bit of yellow over in the corner, purely by accident, but not to waste the paint. I've also added it into the sponge to give me a bit more of a nuanced chip effect along the sides. Again, no accidents, only happy accident. No accidents, only happy coincidences. Okay, Sol Yellow is thinned down to a ratio of around 1 to 2, 1 to 3 in favour of the thinner, and it's applied across the surface yet again. And you'll see it builds up a much stronger yellow look to the entire chevron piece, and it covers up the chips that we've applied initially. Okay, next up, we make the chevrons. In order to do this, I take Tamiya tape. I would suggest using Tamiya. Anything else, it doesn't give quite a crisp enough line. Chevron pattern. So use that control tape in between each of them, and it'll give you an equally spaced chevron every single time. Now, unfortunately here I didn't need to cut down the Tamiya tape whatsoever. It was of the appropriate thickness. You can use a cutting mat to give yourself the appropriate size width, or you can use something like a Heswager tool, which is found on AliExpress. Once the masking has been applied, I will use I believe it's the black primer I used here, over the entirety of the vehicle and over the black pieces of the chevron. I'll mask off the remaining area with some cheap masking tape. I don't need to worry too much about the sharpness of the line because it's there already. Okay, large swathes of silver. How do we manage to create a pleasing look, a nuanced look? Okay, there are a few different tips I can give you. One, mix a matte paint in with the base coat. In this case, I'm using Eclipse Grey. Another tip I can give you is to buy yourself a set of Vallejo metal colours. Now, these colours were specially formulated to run through an airbrush, and they were specifically made to give... so there's colours out there called Alclad. They're enamel-based, and they are very finicky. They offer brilliant results, but they're so hard to use. These paints, the metallic pigments in them, have been milled much finer. So when we spray it across the surface, it gives a much more pleasing metallic look. So this layer is semi-metallic, semi-matte. On top of this, I will build metallic layers to build up the highlight. And in the shadows, I can keep pushing matte paint. So the mixture is Eclipse Grey and Magnesium. This is a scale 75. Sorry, excuse me, reading from the wrong notes. This is Eclipse Grey plus Jet Exhaust. A rough 50-50 mix. And it's 2 parts paint to 1 part thinner. The Vallejo colours are very thin, but the matte paint isn't. Okay, next up, burnt iron is applied straight into the airbrush. Now this is undiluted, but I always apply a tiny amount of thinner at the base of the airbrush to ensure that, or just to help out that it doesn't clog up my airbrush. So even though in the notes it is noted as no thinner, there's an ever so slight amount, tiny amount, barely noticeable, it's a negligible amount. Okay, this is airbrushed into the shadows. As you can see, it's a very dark metallic colour. It almost doesn't give any shine. And this is airbrushed onto the power couplings at the back of the carapace, or of the turret rather, and into the shadows next to the chevrons that have been masked off. I'll also be airbrushing this into the shadows of the main vehicle. The airbrush is running at 20 psi, and you'll notice just how far back my airbrush is. So the farther I get back with the airbrush, the more diffuse the pattern becomes, and the broader the shadows that I can create. Okay, applying shadows at the top of the vehicle to contrast with the chevrons, with the yellow chevrons that we've built up so far. So because this vehicle is very utilitarian in nature, you may want to consider having the shadows at the base of the vehicle. With this, I've put them at the top because this, even though it is a utilitarian Legion, even though I do want to represent it as a non-fantastical force, it's a metallic. So I can play on the metallic scheme by inverting the highlights and shadows. Okay, jet exhaust is now added to the airbrush. There's a small amount of the remaining mixture of the small amount of burnt iron left over. I haven't been too pedantic in getting rid of every single speck of paint. But jet exhaust is added in the main with a small amount of pale burnt metal. Roughly 50-50 mix. Then this will be airbrushed into the upper mid-tone 2 highlights. I don't want to push the highlights much more than this. The jet exhaust has this wonderful sheen to it, and the pale burnt metal has a small amount of kind of like yellow oxide in there to make the metal slightly corrupted. So this isn't a very clean, valorous, knightly, saintly metallic we are working with. We're working with cooler tones, muddier tones that all give off the color psychology that this is a utilitarian, this is an evil Legion. Even though arguments can be made to the contrary. I very much doubt JP will ever watch this. If you do, this is very much an evil colour scheme for your Iron Warriors. If you wanted a bright, heroic silver, you could include more turquoise in the base layer and use brighter colours in the upper mid-tones to highlights. Stay away from cooler tones, like greens and purples. Use turquoise as your only cool colour, and overlap red and blue in the shadows, and that will give you a much more knightly, courtly, heroic looking heroic looking silver. Why is that? Well, the silver would have been polished to a high sheen, the blue would be reflecting the sky, the red would be reflecting the dirt beneath it. But with this, because there's a lot more muddier tones involved, the highlights don't quite peak to a pure silver, but they are corrupted instead by the pale burnt metal. It gives the effect that the oil has been rubbed across the surface of the machine so many times it will never really rub off at this point. Okay, and that's it for video 1. Hope you've enjoyed that, and I will catch you in the next vid where we'll be going through an entire video tutorial series covering weathering, metallic work, the whole 9 yards. Right, catch you in the next one. Bye bye.